Serbia is disappointed with Moscow's proposal regarding gas supplies. President Alexander Vučić stated that the Kremlin is offering Belgrade a contract for only a few months, and such actions are cause for concern. But the Serbs are not alone in this. More and more countries that were once considered friends of Russia are now seeing that behind the grand promises lies nothing but uncertainty. This became especially noticeable at the Russia-Central Asia Summit. A meeting that was intended to showcase unity instead turned into a display of how the Kremlin is desperately trying to keep the region within its orbit without any real offers, tangible benefits, or even some token handouts. Let's now take a look at how Russia has lost its political influence in the regions after the invasion of Ukraine. Before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Central Asian countries maintained close ties with Moscow. The Kremlin wielded political and, to some extent, economic influence in the region, positioning itself as the big brother. But after February 24, 2022, seeing the consequences of Russian aggression, the Central Asian states began to cautiously distance themselves from Moscow out of fear for their own sovereignty and territorial integrity. From the very beginning of the invasion, not a single country in the region supported the Kremlin, either militarily or politically. However, fearing to provoke their aggressive neighbor, many avoided direct terms like invasion or aggression. Over time, the mask of strength slipped off. Seeing Russia's real capabilities, the countries of the region breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time began to look for new partners who could provide them with financial support.
In 2023, Moscow admitted that it was unable to finance the construction of 3 thermal power plants in Kazakhstan, worth about €2 billion, effectively abandoning the project. Whereas Russia used to benefit from its position of power, after 2022 it has increasingly presented itself as a trading partner in order to circumvent sanctions. From a publication by Deutsche Welle.
Russia's role as the economic patron of Central Asia did not remain vacant for long. China and the European Union took advantage of Russia's inability. With their financial investments, they are already pulling countries further away from Moscow. Countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are increasingly establishing, first and foremost, economic ties with the European Union. In April 2025, the first Central Asia EU Summit was held. From Brussels, there were extremely favorable statements for the countries of the region regarding financial investments. Moreover, speaking at the summit in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen emphasized that the parties are entering a new era in their relations.
The EU signed a strategic partnership agreement with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, which includes an investment program worth up to €12 billion in transportation links, critical raw materials, and energy. The Central Asian countries also agreed to step up efforts to prevent companies from circumventing sanctions against the Russian military machine. The EU is also promoting the development of trade routes through the region that bypass Russia and run from China to Turkey and further into Europe. From a Bloomberg agency publication.
Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, now in its 4th year, has forced the Central Asian countries to take a new look at their own security. Putin has essentially made it clear he is ready to use force to bring back under control territories that were once part of the Soviet Union or simply exist in his historical fantasies. Recognizing this signal, the countries of the region began actively seeking new partners, strengthening ties with China, the European Union, Turkey, and the Gulf states. The goal is obvious: to protect themselves from possible Kremlin aggression and to reduce their dependence on Russia. And some countries, like Kazakhstan, have even begun to openly state that they support Ukraine's territorial integrity. This is telling now, since not long ago, people in the region preferred not to say such things out loud.
My main mission is to ensure security, strengthen the sovereignty and independence of our state, and lay a solid foundation for the country's sustainable social and economic development during these turbulent times. And all my decisions are guided precisely by these urgent tasks.
Last week, Putin tried to somehow steer out of the diplomatic dead end and went to Tajikistan for another Russia-Central Asia Summit. However, as expected, Moscow had nothing new or interesting to offer the countries of the region there. As a result of the meeting, The parties agreed to develop measures of mutual trust and attention, as well as equal and good neighborly relations. What's that supposed to mean? The wording sounds nice, but what does it actually mean? The Kremlin simply has nothing to offer its former allies. And this doesn't just apply to the countries of Central Asia. According to Bloomberg, Putin had planned to hold a Rush-Arab Friendship Summit in Moscow on October 15th. Preparations had been underway since spring. Leaders of 22 Arab countries were invited, but the meeting had to be cancelled because hardly anyone wanted to come to Moscow.
In its explanations, the Kremlin talks about a complicated situation and tries to link the decision to foreign policy developments. This is a typical information smokescreen. In reality, this is a diplomatic and reputational blow. The failure of this major event undermines the plan to showcase Russia's international normalization and to use the image of unity as a signal to Western capitals. From a message by the Center for Countering Disinformation on Telegram.
Recently, Putin has been facing problems not only in Central Asia or the Arab world, but also in the Caucasus, a region where Russia, until recently, tried to play the role of so-called third-party regulator. In the Caucasus, where there was a military conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan and where Moscow sent its so-called peacekeepers. But now, the focus is entirely elsewhere. In December 2024, an Azerbaijan Airlines plane flying from Baku to Grozny was unable to reach its destination safely. Russian air defense attacked the passenger aircraft. At that time, there were 67 people on board, 38 of whom died. 10 months passed, and only then, seeing how Baku was distancing itself more and more and had no intention of forgetting this crime, Putin apologized to the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, effectively admitting Russia's guilt. But even in his apology, the dictator couldn't resist shifting the blame as usual. He claimed that the pilot was at fault for flying to Kazakhstan instead of Mykhailo, and also added that a Ukrainian drone was flying nearby. Just look at Aliyev's expression at that moment. Everything is said without words. After that, the Kremlin leader cynically suggested to Baku, and I quote, to turn the page of history. But it seems that this page will now forever remain a stain on Russia's history.
Azerbaijan acted consistently and firmly. Behind it stood Turkey, a key partner and guarantor of strength. Putin's farewell is not a diplomatic gesture, but a symbolic capitulation. The Kremlin was used to dictating the terms, but now it is forced to make excuses. This is a signal to all of Russia's neighbors: you can and should speak firmly with Moscow, demand the truth and compensation. The era of imperial arrogance is over. Russia is no longer a center of influence, but a vulnerable player who is now forced to reckon with those it considered its younger brothers just yesterday. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
And finally, a word about the statements made by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. His country still buys Russian gas. But now, even the Kremlin's most loyal partners are viewed through the lens of blackmail. Vučić stated that Moscow refuses to sign a long-term agreement and is only offering short-term contracts, at most for a few months. The result is obvious. Russia's political influence is fading. Old allies are turning away, and there are no new ones since there is neither money nor trust. As Medvedev once said, there is no money, but you hang in there. But now, even the few who are still trying to stick close to the Kremlin are starting to lose their reason for doing so.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.